The next session features someone from the World Bank. Originally, Richard Damania, who heads the sustainability practice in the World Bank, was going to join us in person, but then he was summoned to Seoul for some work for the bank. And we are delighted that in his place, we were able to connect with Dr. Franziska Ohnsorge, who is the chief economist for the South Asia region of the bank. As it turned out, one thing about people in the World Bank is they are more likely to be on a plane than to be in an office or to be on ground. And she, as we speak, is on a flight to South Asia, I think going to Pakistan first and then to India. So we had to pre-record a fireside chat with her, and so we're going to share that with you, and you'll find that it picks up on some of the themes we heard from Arunabha, because South Asia region that she is responsible for has 8 countries, including India, and India is about 70% of the GDP of the South Asian region. So she is going to share with us some of the issues that she deals with in the bank. And you will see, to the extent that India is part of that conversation, it may echo some of the things we heard earlier from Arunabha. So with that, I'm going to request that we start the video. And just to make it pretty obvious, unfortunately, we cannot ask her any questions. I hope I asked the questions that you would like to ask.
Franziska, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Northeastern University, and thank you for participating in our summit on sustainability.
Thank you very much, Ravi. It's a pleasure to be there, and I wish I could be there in person. Next year I'll be there in person.
I know, I understand you have to be, you're traveling at the time of the event, but we thank you for making time to speak to us about the South Asian region. As the chief economist for the South Asian region of the World Bank, you see, you have a very broad perspective of all of these countries, 8 countries in that region. And I want to start by getting a sense of the pressures for growth in this part of the world. As we know, we often speak of the tension between the growth and protecting the environment. And so I want to get a sense of the first piece of this, which is the pressures for growth. And I understand, we all know this region is one of the most populated regions in the world. It also has a young population. That means a lot of people are joining the labor force every year, and therefore there's pressure to create jobs. At the same time, from my understanding, is that of the working age population, the percentage who are actually employed is lower in this part of the world than in other developing countries. So that means the real pressure to grow and create jobs. So give us a sense of how that lay of the land on that front.
The region is growing well. So people have described South Asia as the bright spot in the global economy, and for good reason. So if you look at this slide, for example, the chart on the left, you see the growth rates in South Asia, the golden diamonds, and you see the bars, which is the growth rates of all the other World Bank regions. So the World Bank has 6 of them, others don't have quite as many, but basically the range of other regions. And you see, in every year since 2021 and going forward, South Asia will be growing faster than all the others. That's why everyone is so excited about South Asia. It's for good reason. The problem is, like you said, it's not enough. It's not enough for the number of people that keep coming into these waves of people coming into the labor market. It's also not enough to meet the authorities' own goals. Every country in the region, except for Pakistan, has the goal to reach upper middle income or high income status, some sort of higher income status over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So that's what you see in the chart on the right, these official goals. And you can see that in none of these countries is current growth, the blue bars, enough to meet the goal. For India, for example, they would have to be growing around 8-ish% instead of growing around 6-ish% to achieve high income status by 2047, which is the centenary of independence. So it's good. It's a bright spot compared to other countries, but it's not a bright spot compared to the region's own goals.
So looking to the next decade or two, these countries are going to be under enormous pressure to try to grow faster. How do we reconcile that with the pressures to also protect the environment and reduce emissions?
Yeah, it's interesting. So even that, right? So what even that 6%, for example, in India, even that growth that we're currently seeing in South Asia has come with a lot of environmental adverse side effects. And I just want to show you this map here because it's really striking. It shows the map of the world and PM 2.5 pollution, so the kind of thing that kills us, you know, the air pollution that's generated by traffic, etc., all around us. You see there's pretty much gray with a few darker grays in Eastern Europe, parts of the Middle East. And then there's a yellow bit somewhere in China. And then there is this thick red maroon band over the Indo-Gangetic Plain. That is the pollution there. It's the most polluted part of the world. It's more polluted. We checked actually against the old China data. Remember sort of a decade ago, 2013, I think was the peak of pollution in China. It is truly polluted. Wow. It's killing more people every year than the whole of the COVID pandemic combined. Even if you take these private sector estimates, every year people are dying of this. So it's a matter of people dying. It's a matter of labor supply, if you want to put this in economic terms, but it's also a matter of economic efficiency. The reason this is, we see, can you imagine if all this pollution had not been so wasted, how much growth would have been? If it had been, all this carbon had been used more efficiently, how high growth would have been? That's really
the challenge. That's the challenge. So you're saying there is, in fact, without increasing emissions, you could have even higher growth to meet the aspirations, but that would require finding ways to reduce the emissions. And I see that in that map of the world, on the title, it says 9 of the world's 10 most polluted cities are in that band. So really this region has got a real challenge on that front. So let's turn then to the question of how to do this, achieve this growth with less emissions. And obviously energy comes up as one of the most important sources of emissions. Tell us what the picture is like in this part of the world in terms of energy efficiency.
You hit the nail on the head. It's all about efficiency. This is, even if you don't like compassion, this is about efficiency. This is about energy efficiency. This is about efficient use of labor, capital, energy too. So for example, if you look at here at this chart on the left in this slide, South Asia as a whole uses twice as much energy to create 1 unit of GDP than the rest of the world. It's really about lack of productivity. It's about an inefficient use of all this energy. And that's the missed opportunity. That's that gap in growth between what is and what needs to be. It's all about the more efficient use of resources. And yes, this chart shows the energy intensity, but you can draw a similar chart about labor productivity or about a misallocation of capital. No, there's part of capital that is captured by state-owned enterprises, for example. So it's just a symptom of a general lack of efficient use of resources. And that's the hope for the region, that this can be unlocked. Just everything be used more efficiently, you would get a huge growth burst. And then you asked also what can be done. So a lot of this is about lack of technology adoption. And the way we have shown this is by asking firms. So we've asked firms in 14 emerging markets and developing economies, including 2 in South Asia, Bangladesh and India, which technologies do you use? Which which energy efficient technologies do you use? They range from the very, very basic LED lighting to something very fancy, like an HVAC, a programmable thermostat for an HVAC unit. Turns out that South Asia does fantastically well on adopting the very, very basic technologies. So 80–90% of South Asian firms use these LED lights. That's more than any other, well, or most other emerging markets and developing economies, far more. What's missing is the advanced technologies. So, for example, in this chart here, we use the programmable thermostats as an example, but there are others. So South Asia uses barely around 5% of firms use that kind of technology, much less than the 12% average in other emerging markets and developing economies. It's really about shifting firms, prodding them in the direction of more energy-efficient technology use.
It makes me also wonder then about the whole electric grid, because that's such an important piece of the problem, and also technology can be used there. Everyone is talking about smart grids and so on. And yet, when I go to Delhi and I walk around in Connaught Place, all I see are backup generators, and everybody's running these generators all the time. How does that connect to the problem that you're describing, and also to the pollution in the cities that we talked about earlier?
That's exactly right. One of the reasons these advanced technologies are not adopted is that for programmable thermostat to work, you've got to have constant power supply. You cannot have power cuts. There's no point in having a programmable thermostat if you can't trust the grid. And as it turns out, South Asian firms, actually, much larger proportion of South Asian firms has backup diesel generator, not a backup generator. Kicks in every time the power grid fails. And these are extremely inefficient and polluting technologies. But on average, a much larger, the number of firms that have had a power cut in the last month is much larger in South Asia than in these other regions, these other countries that we have in our firm survey here. And they range from anywhere from, they even include countries like Ethiopia, Georgia, Brazil. I mean, it's really a broad sample. South Asian firms use much more. They have to rely on these diesel backup generators. And they do it because they can't trust the grid. Once they've had a power cut, they're much more likely to use the diesel. Once they've had, backward looking, once they've had the experience of a power cut, we run a little probit regression if you, for those of you who are technically inclined. But the probability of using a diesel generator is much higher once you've experienced that first power cut. It really it reduces the trust in the system.
It really breaks my heart to hear you say this, because I started early in my career worked for Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, which is one of the Indian companies that produces power generating equipment. And way back then, we were talking about the same challenges of how do you create a reliable power supply and all of that. And it seems the problem is still with us. Have you? No?
It's improved dramatically. It's improved so much, but you just need one cut. You just need one cut to make people not trust it anymore and have that diesel generator, just in case.
Yeah.
It's improved dramatically. I mean, India has made great strides in rolling out access to electricity. If you look at these sustainable development goals, it's a huge improvement, especially in India, but also in Bangladesh. But it's just not fully reliable. And the minute it's not 100%, people stay with the old polluting technology.
Have you seen any innovative approaches or solutions in the region to addressing these issues? Because I feel innovation has to be a big part of finding the solutions. And I feel the innovations have to be homegrown. That is, it can't always come from the developed countries. They need to come up with creative, low-cost solutions. Have you seen any of those? And can the World Bank play any role in diffusing these innovations?
Yeah, it's remarkable. So as a next step after having identified the issue that firms don't adopt enough these new technologies, we try to find the literature across the world. What works? How can firms be prodded into adopting these more energy-efficient technologies? And there are four things that really help. One is, of course, access to finance, which is what firms always complain about and what banks always say is not justified. But there is increasing evidence that access to finance does help firms adopt these new technologies. Then there is the issue of regulation. Regulation is incredibly powerful. But it has two types. So there is regulation achieves its goal. You regulate pollution, it will cut down polluting emissions. But there are two types. There's the command and control, where you have quotas, and that is powerful, but it has side effects. It really does reduce productivity and output, sometimes even jobs in some countries. What works much, much better without the negative side effects and is just as powerful is market-based pollution. And I think that's what there's a beautiful example of what you're looking for. which is this homegrown technology. Gujarat has a pollution emissions trading scheme that has dramatically reduced pollution among firms. It is a homegrown example of a market-based regulation that has been very effective. So this kind of scheme, usually when you hear about these pollution or climate certificate trading schemes, etc., you think of advanced countries, you think of the US and the EU and California. No, these things are also being rolled out in emerging markets now, and they work. They are effective in their goal, for the purpose that they were intended for. More
yeah, that's a wonderful example. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering if the World Bank would find a way then to get other states within India or within the region to adopt similar practices, and maybe even other developing countries that are working with the World Bank.
Yeah, so definitely the World Bank tries to have this knowledge transfer from country to country, from state to state, within a country. China is actually a prime example of having these local pilots that are then rolled out. What works is rolled out. And sometimes it's rolled out well and sometimes not rolled out well, because often the pilots are area specific. They work well in one part of the country, but not so well in another part of the country. But it's a great little laboratory of these things. So the way the World Bank tries to encourage at least a country-to-country kind of knowledge transfer is by having people move around. You know, I'm sure you know that literature of embedded technology in investment. You could just as well say it as embedded knowledge in people. We try to rotate people around from country to country every 4 to 5 years. That's really a big part of trying to disseminate expertise. And then there's, of course, our research, like literature reviews and the kind of things we do here, comparing cross countries.
Got it. I want to go back now to what we started with, which is the job creation pressures. And looking forward now, in light of the adjustments these countries are going to have to make, what is the outlook for jobs and in this energy transition era that we are entering?
Yeah, no, it's a real. I mean, if we were talking about any other region, one could probably just constrain the discussion to green jobs, polluting jobs. Not in this region. This region really has a jobs problem. All the countries, with I think the exception of Nepal, have a lower share, or the share of the working age population that is employed in employment is in the bottom quartile of emerging markets and developing economies. All the countries in the region have a problem. Now, much of this is because women tend not to work. But generally, even for men, it's getting harder with every year that passes. So there is a job creation issue anyways. You add to that then the green transition. That means that a lot of people will, over the next 10, 20 years, that whole generation is going to start looking for a job. Because on average, when we just use sort of a standard classification of jobs, occupations, and apply the very standard classification that's been developed for the US, fair enough, and we apply that to South Asia, we find that about 9% of jobs are polluting. So 9% on average across South Asia, 9% of employed over the course of the next couple of decades will be looking around. They will have to find new jobs. That that can be a wrenching transition. And to get a bit of a sense of how, so we've used the data backward looking, but the question is what will happen? No, that's your question. So to get a sense of what might happen, we've looked at another example, closest we could find in a literature that actually has a lot of studies where we can do a meta-regression analysis, is resource booms and busts. Because they also lead to big booms in some areas and then collapses in employment when the copper mine or the oil well is depleted. So when you look at these resource booms and busts, you find that in the areas where they happen, tend to be regions of countries, you see a massive increase in employment because everyone is being sucked into this area to be employed, not just in the mine, but also around the mine, all sorts of services and other things. So there's a big increase in employment, small increase in earnings because there's just such an inflow of people, but statistically significant. So the region booms, and then comes the bust. And that's the scary thing. The boom is very temporary. The bust is not. The bust is lasting. So for the bust, we have a lasting decline in earnings. That's much bigger than the increase in earnings ever was during the boom. And we have a lasting decline in employment, and people just flee. You have this exodus of people and a decline in employment. And the decline in employment can last over generations, because when the parents don't work, the kids are less likely to go to school and get an education and work. So it's a lasting loss, which is something that governments really can help us. There is a role for government, and the role for government is to make it easier, to just make it easier to move. Make it easier to move. Try not to lock people into the place where there is no economic opportunity left. Just make it easier to move out, find jobs elsewhere. When we come full circle, there need to be jobs created elsewhere, everywhere in aggregate. That's why it's so important to create jobs in aggregate.
So just as a clarification, I'm wondering what's an example of a polluting job and what's an example of a green job?
That's a very good question. So a green job, actually, it's very different from an advanced economy. When you think of a green job, or when I started this and thought of a green job, I was thinking of an engineer on a solar farm. No? That's not a green job in South Asia. In South Asia, a green job is the bicycle repairman. It's these rickshaw cyclists who go and pick up the trash. That's a green job. It's about recycling. Yeah, it's trash collection, recycling. Those are green jobs. Car repair. Those are the majority of green jobs in South Asia. Polluting jobs are many. So obviously there's the mining industry, yes. But there's also tanning, for example. So I don't think you will ever want to reduce all the 9% of polluting jobs to zero. You will not want to do that. There will be some polluting jobs that will just remain there, like the tanners or the people who color, who color the clothes. They will stay. But there are also a lot of polluting jobs that are genuinely in coal mining.
So this is going to be an interesting, challenging transition that you have to manage, that you will actually have to lose some jobs that you already have, even as you're trying to create enough jobs, not only to make up for those, but additionally to catch up on the people who have not been employed and to catch up on the people who will join the workforce. So this looks like a pretty daunting period ahead for these countries. Let me switch now to what might happen at the end of the day. After you do all the mitigation you can, there's still going to be a role for adaptation and resilience to deal with climate crises. Give us a sense of, this region compared to other regions. How vulnerable is it going to be to climate crises?
Yeah, I think what is actually maybe it's difficult to say more urgent, but it's just as urgent, the problem of adaptation. Because this region, of all the regions, the World Bank's emerging market and developing economy regions, is the most vulnerable to climate change. So we have this slide here where we showed Notre Dame's vulnerability index for all the World Bank regions. And South Asia is the most vulnerable region on average. But I want to just give you a bit of a flavor of this vulnerability rather than an abstract number. Anywhere between 20 and 60% of the land area of the three largest countries, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, gets a drought every year. That's a lot. Or 60 million people are affected by some sort of climate disaster every year. On average, it's not the same 60 million people. It travels around. So pretty much a large fraction of people gets hit over the course of a few years by some sort of climate shock. And that's the shocks. Then there's also the trend. Just an unrelenting trend increase in heat. And there the region is in a bad starting point, because already it's 6 degrees warmer than everyone else. You already, in the largest countries, three largest countries plus Sri Lanka, 6 out of 8 hours in the day are simply too hot to work outside. 40% of the population are in agriculture. It's too hot for them. That'll rise by another hour every year, by another hour per day by 2050. So by 2050, daylight hours will be pretty difficult to use for work in the fields, for agriculture. So these guys will have to start working at night. It's really a challenge. And I want to come to draw the link here to the previous question, we haven't discussed it, but this is one of the big themes here, that the fiscal positions in the region are really fragile. I mean, several countries are already in debt distress or have been in debt distress. So there's not much governments can do to help. So the burden of adapting to climate change will be with the private sector. Firms can do that with technologies, and we've discussed it. Households, how do households adapt to climate change? Again, we've done a massive literature review, 5,000 articles, sifted them into a few messages. Households adapt to climate change in two ways. Either they get government benefits, which in this region is difficult given the fiscal positions, or they move jobs. But that requires there to be jobs outside agriculture, which comes again full circle. We need jobs in this region. This region needs to create jobs outside agriculture. The machines can run during the day. People need jobs outside agriculture.
So that's another transition that's going to have to happen as part of the development process. Wow, the two speakers to follow in the summit. One is Schneider Electric, the chairman of Schneider Electric, which has been a very progressive company in terms of sustainability. So we can see how some of the issues that you've raised and the previous speakers have raised might be addressed by multinational companies which have deep reservoirs of technology and also deep understanding of many of these emerging markets. And then we have an NGO from India, which among other things works on natural disasters and helping out after one of those disasters. And from what you're telling us, we should expect that there will be a regular pattern of natural disasters. And so I think you've really set the stage for us to now dig deeper into possible solutions at the private sector level, because that's where you're saying a lot of the innovation has to come from. And thank you, Dr. Franziska. This has been very eye-opening. And I'm sure the audience has questions that I probably have not asked, but I hope next time we do this, we will have you in person. It'll be a pleasure to welcome you to Northeastern University. Thank you, Dr. Franziska.
Pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Yes, and next time I'll be with you in person.
All right, that's a promise. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.